What would happen if the Earth just stopped spinning? No warning, no reason. From 1 second to the next, everything was frozen. You wake up and there is no more wind. The sky is still. The sun remains fixed on the horizon as if time had been kidnapped. The tides disappeared. Days and nights ceased to exist. Everything you knew as movement has ceased. But the real question is not whether this is possible. And because nothing in the universe stops, why does absolutely everything rotate, from the smallest particle to the largest black hole? There is a force that prevents the universe from remaining silent, an energy so deep that you never notice it, but it sustains your existence every thousandth of a second. If she fails, there would be nothing left. But what if this force ceased to exist? What would come first? The collapse of the planet, or the end of reality itself? Before proceeding, stop and think. Could you survive in a world where everything that moves has stopped? Leave your theory in the comments. What do you think would happen with time, with gravity, with you? There are theories that suggest this may be more than just a wild guess, and what you're about to discover in this video may completely change the way you understand movement, time, and life. Everything that exists in the universe rotates, from the subatomic particles that form matter to the gigantic galaxies that cut through the cosmos at millions of kilometers per hour. The movement is no exception. It's the rule. And more than that, it is inevitable behavior. Rotation, translation, vibration. Each of these dynamics does not happen by chance, but for a reason deeply rooted in the fundamental laws of physics. The universe began with an asymmetric explosion. The Big Bang was not just a release of energy, but a point of origin that imprinted the fabric of space-time with an impulse of movement. This initial inheritance manifested itself as angular momentum, a property that makes rotating bodies tend to continue rotating unless something stops them. This is why planets rotate. This is why atoms vibrate, and that's why the Earth has never stopped since it was formed. This angular momentum is so powerful that it keeps Jupiter spinning in just 10 hours, even though it is the largest planet in the solar system. Venus rotates retrograde in the opposite direction to most planets, and black holes, despite their extreme gravity, spin so fast that they distort the space-time around them. Some reach speeds close to that of light at their most extreme limits. This reveals that the rotation is not an accidental detail. It is an inevitable consequence of the conditions that created the cosmos. But the most intriguing thing is that this persistent movement does not require continuous force. Contrary to what many imagine, the universe does not need fuel to keep moving. Cosmic inertia causes everything to continue spinning indefinitely until an external force, strong enough, acts to stop it. And in the vacuum of space, these forces rarely exist. Therefore, once something starts to spin, this spin tends to perpetuate itself. This dynamic is everywhere: satellites orbiting Earth, stars revolving around black holes, entire galaxies dancing around invisible gravitational centers. And yet, most people never ask themselves why. Why does everything spin? Why is absolutely nothing at complete rest? The answer involves physical laws, yes, but perhaps there is something beyond mechanics. Something that forces us to rethink the role of movement in the functioning of the universe. Because if everything rotates, maybe it's not just a matter of balance. There is an invisible link between this movement and an even more far-reaching phenomenon. Something that goes far beyond classical physics, and that, if interrupted, could redefine everything we understand as life, time, and reality. Imagine that without any warning signs, the Earth stops rotating. Instantly. In milliseconds, the planet, which was spinning at more than 1,600 km/h at the equator, enters an absolute state of inertia. But the surface does not follow this slowdown. Everything that is not fixed to the rocky bed, oceans, atmosphere, buildings, living beings, continues to move, as if it had been thrown from a speeding car that suddenly stopped. The result? Gigantic waves, hundreds of meters high, cross continents as if they were leaves. Buildings are ripped from their foundations and swept away by supersonic winds. Planes crash, bridges collapse. Vehicles, ships, towers, everything becomes a projectile. Coastal towns disappear in minutes. The interior of the continents becomes a desert of ruins. The once stable atmosphere around the planet shifts violently, creating a global vortex. Friction between air masses generates heat storms and pressure shocks so extreme that the composition of the air itself becomes unstable. Most life forms do not survive the first few seconds. The oxygen mixes with gases released from the colliding soil and waters, creating a lethal environment over almost the entire surface. Without rotation, the Earth's magnetic field collapses. Within days, solar radiation begins to reach the surface directly, burning what remains of the forests and exterminating any exposed life form. Without rotation, there is no longer a dynamo effect on the core. The planet loses its invisible protection against cosmic particles. Satellites fail, communications cease. Meanwhile, sunlight remains fixed over half the planet. On that side, the temperature rises quickly until it exceeds 60 degrees. Evaporation from the oceans accelerates, the ozone layer breaks down, and dense clouds begin to block the view of the sky. The other side, plunged into continuous darkness, records temperature drops below 70 degrees. The Earth's crust begins to crack due to thermal imbalance. Glaciers advance over entire continents, freezing everything. The biosphere collapses. Ecosystems disappear, the food chain breaks, electricity, water networks, food distribution, everything fails. The regions between constant light and perpetual darkness become the only points where life still tries to resist. But time, in this world, no longer has meaning. You would just have seconds to survive the invisible impact of inertia. He wouldn't feel anything until he was thrown against what was left of his reality. No human being is prepared for an event of this magnitude, and yet it forces us to face an uncomfortable question. Now imagine, how would you react if time stopped existing the way you know it? What would you do if there were no more mornings or nights? Do you believe you could maintain your sanity without any reference to natural time? Leave your opinion in the comments. What would be the first signs that humanity has lost control of its own pace? Your point of view can bring new theories to this discussion and perhaps raise questions that have not yet been asked. But that's just the local impact, because if everything revolves, from our body to our routines, there is something bigger behind this universal repetition. And this constant rotation may be connected to an even deeper truth, one that goes beyond our planet and perhaps beyond our understanding. Without rotation, the idea of time as we know it falls apart. The alternation between day and night disappears. Clocks continue to tell the hours, but they no longer correspond to reality. The concept of morning, afternoon, and night loses its meaning. Time zones cease to exist. Sunlight settles at one point on the globe, and darkness settles at another, creating permanent zones of scorching heat and extreme cold. The notion of a calendar, an agenda, a routine, everything becomes useless. This temporal collapse directly affects the human organism. The body is regulated by circadian rhythms, an internal system that depends on the alternation between light and dark. With the absence of this cycle, severe physiological disorders arise. Sleep stops following any pattern. The brain loses temporal reference. People spend days awake and then collapse from exhaustion. Hormone production is unregulated. The immune system weakens. Cases of delirium, permanent insomnia, psychotic crises, and extreme disorientation become common in a matter of days. The human mind deprived of the natural perception of the passage of time, comes into conflict with its own consciousness. The perception of reality becomes distorted. Studies on confinement in environments without natural light have already shown that isolation from time generates cognitive confusion. Now imagine this extended to the entirety of civilization. Collective mental health collapses. From a social point of view, basic structures are beginning to fail. Productive routines disappear. Without a clear cycle of hours, companies, institutions, schools, and transport systems fall into disorganization. The economy loses its momentum, commerce stops, administrative chaos is immediate, and worse, technology fails together. Satellite systems have been programmed based on the Earth's rotation and cycles. With the interruption, orbits are destabilized. GPS data becomes useless. Telecommunications networks lose synchronization. Servers enter data loops. Financial platforms and energy networks operate out of rhythm, causing blackouts and chain failures. Cities that have not yet been destroyed by environmental violence now face invisible collapse, the collapse of temporal structure. Everything that kept life flowing, meals, commuting, meetings, communication, depends on something that no one sees, but that has always been there. The movement of the Earth as a reference for time. And now, without him, the present falls apart, and the future cannot be calculated. But if rotation is the hidden basis of everything we organize as a society, what does it reveal about the way we live? What if we are more dependent on this pattern than we care to admit, even in our simplest decisions? Rotation is not a choice. It is an inevitable consequence of how the universe came to be. When the Big Bang happened, what expanded was not just matter and energy, it was movement. The universe was born asymmetrical, and this initial asymmetry was what generated the rotation of everything we know today. A central concept that explains this phenomenon is the conservation of angular momentum. This law of physics states that if an object begins to rotate in an isolated system and no external force acts on it, it will continue to rotate forever. Without air, without friction, without significant resistance, the vacuum of space becomes the ideal setting for this rule. The universe does not rotate by will. It spins because it has never been stopped. When a cloud of gas and dust begins to collapse under its own gravity to form a star or planet, any slight initial rotation is intensified as the cloud compresses. This principle, similar to that of a skater who spins faster by shrinking his arms, applies on a cosmic scale. This is why stars are born spinning. This is why the planets rotate. And that's why, to this day, entire galaxies continue to revolve around their centers. Rotation is not just a feature. It is part of the identity of everything that exists. Even extreme objects like black holes maintain their rotation. And this completely changes the structure of the surrounding space. Rotating black holes drag space-time with them, a phenomenon known as frame dragging. It is as if the very fabric of the universe is distorted by the speed at which these bodies rotate. Some of them spin so fast that at the edge of the event horizon, space behaves in a completely counterintuitive way. This evidence suggests that rotation is intertwined with the very structure of the universe. She is not peripheral, it's structural. What spins is not just what we see, it is what sustains everything that exists. On larger scales, even the universe itself may be rotating in ways we don't yet understand. Something that some cosmological theories try to explore. Everything rotates. Planets, moons, stars, black holes, subatomic particles, even magnetic fields and electron orbits follow this pattern. There is no exception. There is no absolute rest. And no matter how much our eyes don't notice it, we are always moving, even when we are still. When you realize that absolutely everything in the universe rotates, even what we cannot see, an inevitable question arises. What else could be happening without us noticing? It is in this invisible layer of reality that the most uncomfortable explanations tend to hide. Understanding this means leaving the surface of knowledge and starting to see what few people know. So leave your like here on this video, because this is a clear sign that you value content that questions, reveals, and expands what we understand as reality. It's an impulse that strengthens this community and gives more people access to reflections that do not usually circulate around. But what would happen if this force that keeps everything spinning simply stopped existing? Physics has hypotheses, but no definitive answer, and some theories suggest that rotation isn't just keeping bodies in motion. It may be supporting the very structure of matter. Current physics is built on invisible but immutable pillars. One of them is angular momentum, the natural tendency of everything that rotates to keep rotating. But what if this force, for some reason, ceased to exist? We are not talking about a body stopping rotating due to resistance. We are talking about the complete removal of the ability to generate rotation itself. A universe without angular momentum. The first consequence would be the immediate collapse of cosmic stability. Planets would stop orbiting, stars would stop rotating on themselves. Entire galaxies would lose their structure. Planetary systems would be torn apart in a matter of seconds. Without rotation, there is no balance between centrifugal and gravitational forces. Everything would be pulled violently toward the nearest center of mass. The orbital dynamics that organize the universe would become chaos. But the implications go beyond the astronomical scale. Atoms also rotate. Electrons orbit nuclei based on principles derived from quantum angular momentum. Without this, the atoms themselves would collapse. The structure of matter as we know it would cease to exist. The space between particles would be lost, causing an abrupt compression of matter. The universe could implode in a chain reaction, dissolving not only form, but the very existence of everything physical. The absence of rotation would create a new state, that of absolute stagnation, not just immobility, but the loss of meaning in the laws we know today. Time would cease to be a sequence of events interconnected by movement. Without action, there is no interval, and without interval, there is no time. In this scenario, the universe would not just stop, it would become incomprehensible. This hypothesis is not predicted by any classical model, but is discussed within theoretical frontiers of modern physics. There are those who consider that angular momentum is not just a consequence, but a structural requirement of reality. Something that keeps the invisible gears of the cosmos turning. Removing this element would be like erasing gravity or reversing time. The result would not be chaos, it would be the end of everything. What if this really were possible? The universe as we know it, with laws, structures and limits, could only be a temporary state, a phase sustained by a force that we don't even fully understand. But this possibility raises an even more disturbing question. Could it be that the universe has already gone through a state of non-motion and then started spinning again? Or worse, could he stop again and not give us time to notice? The idea that the Earth could simply stop rotating seems absurd at first glance, and from the perspective of classical physics, it really is. The planet has accumulated an enormous amount of rotational energy since its formation. It is estimated that the Earth stores more than 2 quintillion joules in rotation alone. To stop this movement, it would be necessary to apply an unimaginable force, and uniformly, over its entire mass. Still, science does not ignore extreme scenarios. They exist theoretical simulations that explore what would happen if large external forces interfered with Earth's rotation. One of the most discussed scenarios is the impact of a giant meteor with sufficient mass and speed to exert a deceleration torque, but even colossal bodies like the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs didn't come close to altering the rotation significantly. what would be needed to stop Earth wouldn't be an impact. It would be a cosmic scale event, like colliding with an entire planet. Another possibility raised by theoretical physicists would be the so-called gravity break. If the Earth were to experience an extreme gravity anomaly, such as the gravitational field of a neutron star or a black hole, it could, in theory, interfere with its rotation, but that would imply the total destruction of the planet long before any measurable slowdown occurs. In computer simulation environments, some studies attempt to project the effects of rotation being artificially interrupted, not to discuss its feasibility, but to understand the resulting damage. These simulations demonstrate that the collapse would be instantaneous and widespread. Structural failures at the tectonic level, disintegration of the crust, rupture of the atmosphere, imbalance of the electromagnetic field, and release of thermal energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. What makes this hypothesis interesting for science is not the expectation that this could happen, but the opportunity to test fundamental limits of planetary physics. By imagining the impossible, scientists identify which parameters make reality possible. And in this case, the conclusion is straightforward. The Earth's rotation is not only constant, it is indispensable. It is rooted in the balance of forces that keep everything in order: gravity, inertia, temperature, magnetism, time. What if the stability we see is just a surface layer, a convenient illusion created by our limited perception? Because if everything that seems permanent can, in theory, collapse, what else can be sustained by forces we don't even understand? Now tell me, what mysterious hypothesis about the universe has crossed your mind? Those ideas that seem too absurd to say out loud, but that perhaps hide something revealing. Comment below. I want to know what you imagine could be behind the things that no one explains. It could be a strange theory, a scary possibility, or a scenario you've always wanted to see explored. Some of these ideas could indeed become the channel's next videos. And whoever comments now will literally be helping to build this journey into the unknown. But this absolute constancy raises an uncomfortable doubt. What if we are faced with an illusion of permanence? If the universe is unstable by definition, why are we so confident in the idea that something can't stop? Perhaps the stability we perceive is just the visible part of a much more volatile reality. If, against all odds, part of humanity survives Earth's shutdown, civilization would face the greatest adaptation challenge in history. The planet, divided into two extremes, one side of scorching heat under a fixed sun, and the other frozen in eternal darkness, would force survivors to live in the narrow grey zone between these two worlds. This line, known as Terminator, would be the last habitable frontier. In this transition range, the weather would be severe, unstable, and unpredictable. Drastic solutions would be needed. Underground cities would become common, protected from radiation, extreme cold and heat. Ventilation, artificial cultivation, and geothermal protection systems would be developed on a global scale. The surface would largely become uninhabitable, a desert of ruins and memory. The remaining civilization would have to reinvent its social organization. The concept of a working day would disappear. The notion of time would cease to be chronological and would become functional. Schedules, calendars, and natural cycles would be replaced by simulated routines controlled by technology. The idea of time would become an artificial construct, regulated by internal systems, an electronic clock dictating the rhythm of life. To recreate some kind of balance, scientists could try to generate artificial rotation, not of the planet, but of cities. Rotating structures, suspended mega-habitats or orbital stations would be alternatives to simulate gravity, climate, and artificial cycles. Humanity, unable to restore the planet, would create rotating replicas of the lost reality. In this new world, the concept of habitable space would become scarce. Overcrowding in safe zones would generate social tensions and conflicts over territory. Isolated groups would try to adapt to bordering regions, creating experimental communities in extreme conditions. Mass migrations would occur in search of minimal resources. Inequality would intensify, and new forms of social organization would emerge, shaped by the urgency of survival. This scenario, although hypothetical, speaks directly to issues we already face today. Climate crises, extreme environmental events, forced migration, resource scarcity, and ecological collapse. They are part of a real process that is already putting pressure on the balance of life on Earth. The difference is that in today's world, we still have movement. We still have time. But for how long? Because if humanity can survive without rotation, the most difficult question may not be how, and yes, why. What would we be trying to preserve? The body or the memory of the world turning? We live on a planet that moves all the time, but we rarely think about it. The Earth's movement is so constant that it becomes invisible, and perhaps because of that, we forget that it is essential. Not just in the physical sense, but in everything that concerns existence as a dynamic process. Movement is more than displacement. It's rhythm, cycle, transformation. It's continuity. The Earth's rotation defines the time we use to organize our lives, defines the climate, seasons, biological systems. But it also shapes our cultural structures. Sunrise as a symbol of a new beginning, dusk as a pause, time itself as a unit of value. Without movement, all this disappears. Life loses its cadence. Thought dissolves into repetition. The human being standing still becomes disoriented. This theoretical exercise teaches us that movement is a hidden but absolute value. Rotation is not just a physical phenomenon. It represents the very logic of the expanding universe. Nothing remains. Everything is in transition, and this transition is what gives meaning to time, space, and our perception of reality. When thinking about a world without movement, we are not just imagining a frozen planet. We are reflecting on what sustains us as a species. Language, science, culture, history, everything is in flux. Interruption of this flow means interruption of conscious existence. Therefore, this absurd hypothesis touches on something fundamental. Rotation is the concrete metaphor of what it means to live. It also reveals our psychological dependence on the predictable. The Earth's rotation, constant and silent, is a guarantee that allows us to plan, sleep, wake up, remember, wait. Without it, reality loses structure. We cannot function in a world without reference. Movement is what anchors us, even if most of us never stop to think about it. This reflection also reinforces how much we take the functioning of the universe for granted. When everything is operating as usual, we become complacent. But all it takes is a small anomaly, a tiny glitch in rotation, for example, to expose how fragile the balance that sustains us is. In this sense, the rotation of the Earth is the backdrop on which the entire narrative of life depends. We move because the universe moves. But do we understand what this really means? Or are we just being carried passively by a gear that we never question? Because if there's anything the movement teaches, it's that stopping isn't always an option. Now that you understand what's really at stake when we talk about the Earth's movement and what could happen if it stopped, you are part of a group that sees beyond the obvious. This type of knowledge does not circulate easily. Most people never stop to think that the simple fact that we are spinning is what keeps everything going. Share this video now with anyone you know who also questions the universe. Bring more curious minds into this conversation, because understanding what sustains reality is the first step to questioning it. As you watch this video, the planet spins at more than 1,600 km/h, and you don't even notice. It is this invisible movement that sustains time, climate, life. It's what makes you wake up in the daylight, sleep at night, and notice the passage of time without having to look at the clock. But now, after all that has been revealed, the inevitable question remains. Do you think humanity could survive without the Earth moving? If this type of reflection makes sense to you, this is the right place. Here, each video reveals hidden layers of reality, mysteries that still defy science, hypotheses that open holes in logic and questions that no one dares to answer. Being part of this is more than watching. It is exploring, questioning, and understanding the universe in a way that few are willing to face. Then, activate the bell and subscribe now. Why the next mystery begins, the exact second this one ends. And speaking of what's next, there's a new hypothesis looming on the horizon, a scenario that, if real, could change the way you perceive everything that keeps you grounded. Literally. Click on the video that is appearing on your screen now and continue this journey through the invisible forces that shape reality, because some truths are only revealed when you dare to go deeper.